I wasn't able to kind of make decisions and stand by them. I had a really deep sense of sort of imposter syndrome. My confidence sort of plummeted. I was kind of questioning myself, things that I was doing.
Because the moment I was like, no, I'm not going on payroll, I need to invoice. They were like, oh, and let's add, I had my child at 16. So I was more like, no, I can't do that. They're like, child, why is everything wrong with you? You're holding a baby and holding an invoice.
And I spent the money on the offices, and we were getting it all kitted out, and we had a launch and everything, and literally within 4 weeks the turnover plummeted. And I kept thinking next month it'll be better, and started ploughing in money to keep the business going, to keep the staff on.
I didn't really have that much money. I had my savings, but I don't come from a family of privilege. I come from a working class family. So I had all of these kind of barriers that at the time I didn't realise were barriers. I just got on with it and just moved. I moved without thinking. I had an idea.
Hello and welcome to another episode of She's the Boss Female Entrepreneur Stories, where I'm joined by phenomenal women in business who share the highs, the lows and the in-betweens of starting and running their own businesses. As usual, if you haven't already done so, please make sure that you click that subscribe or follow button to make sure that you never forget when I release a new interview. And if you're not already following on social media, please follow at She's the Boss INTL on Twitter and Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn as Daniela Genus and Facebook, Daniela Genus, She's the Boss. Or She's the Boss, Daniela Genus. I always forget which way around it is. But please do connect. Today, I'm really excited because I am joined by Emma Pinnock.
Hi.
Hi, Emma. Tell us about your business.
Oh, my business. So I run the Essential Education Group. It is a consultancy for schools, families and organisations. So my background is a teacher. I've taught for 20 years and I heavily specialised in special educational needs, and autism is my specialism. So the bedrock of my business really is about training and consultancy around autism and special educational needs. So I support schools to develop their practice and their systems and to keep up to date with policies and all the things that happen that change overnight. And I support families in their journey. The family work is my heart work, and the school work is my, I know it, and it's just comfortable for me, work as well. So yeah, that's a bit what I do.
That sounds like a hugely rewarding and fulfilling business that you're running. Where was the inspiration? Where did the inspiration come from to go down?
So for me, I am a psychologist at heart. That's where I started my studies, and that's kind of where I was going to head towards being an educational psychologist. And to do that, you had to teach for 2 years. I never got there 20 years later. However, that psychologist was always in me. So whenever a child came into my class with barriers to learning, it was just very natural for me to gear towards them and figure out actually why is there a barrier and can we move this barrier on? So that was just kind of a natural progression in my career, to the point where I was in leadership roles, setting up settings and things for local authorities around need. So that's kind of where my progression went. Then for me, I had a little one who then decided to change my world. And as he changed my world, I had to think differently. And it was a throwaway thought while I was on maternity. What else would I do? You know, could I do anything else, and what would it be? And it definitely was a throwaway thought. But it was a thought that just built up over the years. Met some significant people as I went along. He started to kind of bring that thought even more to the forefront of my mind. And then 2 years ago, really 3 years in of the first thought, I decided to go self-employed and start the journey, really. So that's really it.
I love that so many of the women I speak to are kind of compelled to start considering or actually doing entrepreneurship during maternity leave.
Yeah.
Having a child really can just completely change your whole perspective on things and really make you step outside of your comfort zone. And I love that. Even though you didn't do it immediately, that's where the kind of the thought sparked that led to you then doing it latterly.
Definitely, yeah.
So you then started the business with a small child. What were some of the challenges that you experienced?
Oh, that was really interesting. So it was kind of nice because he was in nursery at the time. So nursery days are quite extended days. So there was a little bit of balance there. I think the biggest challenge has come since he started reception, which was September gone, and understanding how my business now works around this particular routine. And one of the key reasons why I knew I had to change my lifestyle was because as a teacher, I had it in the back of my mind, I'd never be there to drop him off. I'd never be there to collect him because that's actually my working time. I would not necessarily be at sports days and things like that unless my boss wanted that to happen. And so I've been really conscious to say that in this time, I need to do those things because that was one of the pushes for me to get here. So I've had to really work around my clients. You know, so even though I still work with schools, I've been really clear with the hours that I can do and, you know, what I will achieve in those hours and those kind of things. So those have been the kind of things that I've found challenging since he's gone into reception. I found it a little bit easier to manage my time when he was in nursery, even though my pocket wasn't managing when he was in nursery.
Yeah. I can relate. When my daughter was at nursery, I was getting her there normally about 8 o'clock, 8:15 at the latest. And towards the end, because I was trying to make sure I was making use, I was picking her up like 5:30, 4:45. And then she went to school and I dropped her off at 8:30. And by 3 o'clock, I had to go pick her up. And I'm just like,
what's this?
Time just goes so quickly. I'm like, nursery, I miss you so much. So when she changed schools, her school had an after school club to 4:45. So that made a huge difference. But obviously since COVID, we're all at home anyway. So
we are,
we'll come back to that later. So in terms of kind of having the confidence to go and tell your clients, whether that be the schools or the parents, your kind of time block, was that something that did you have to build yourself up to do it? Did you have any pushback? Because I know for people that are watching or listening who may be it might not necessarily even be because their kids started school, it could be for another reason, but sometimes people are a bit nervous of kind of laying down the law, so to speak, with clients. It's kind of like they want it, so I have to do it, as opposed to no, here's my boundaries. How did you find that?
I think because my journey into self-employment was about boundaries, and the fact that I hadn't had them for so many years in my career, it had to be the forefront of what I did, because I really needed to know that I was being present, and that was one of the reasons. So for me, it was kind of, this is my availability, and that's my availability. Doesn't mean that I won't do other things outside of that. So, you know, once the evening meal's done and maybe once he's in bed, I will pick up some work for them. But if they want me face to face, those are the hours. Now, I am flexible. Obviously, I wouldn't be like, there's no day I can never do it. So I do have support where, you know, if I need to have an extended day, which I have done, I will do that for clients once in a while. But my general rule is these are the hours that I do face-to-face work with any of my clients, because it's really crucial for me to stick to one of the key reasons why I stepped into self-employment, which was to be really present. So, yeah.
I love that. And how easy was it for you to get your first client? I assume that you already had relationships within kind of the education sector. So how easy was it to do that? Because you're going in on a completely different level now.
Completely.
So
what I'd say, definitely. So what I'd say is when I first stepped out of my role and people knew that I'd finished my job, it was very quick. Emma, come and do this. Emma, going to do that, which was fantastic. But what I've realised now, I'm 2 years down the road, that actually that shaped the business a little bit more than I shaped the business. Because what I did, I responded to the need that was coming my way and didn't respond to the business plan that I know I've got in my mind. And so there was a little bit of that happened. But, you know, you think at the time, oh, this is quick, this is going to get money in, I can do this, etc. So there had to become a point where I thought, okay, how do I make sure I balance this? So as I said earlier, like I love working in schools. It really fits my early intervention pictures, which is what I'm all about in terms of children with needs. It's about getting early intervention, and schools one of the key agencies for that. So I love working in schools for that reason, but my heart work is with the families. So I've really had to try and balance out that school demand so that I can really focus and start to develop my work for the families. That's where I really want things to move to. So in terms of that, it was very quick. It was. I finished in the July. I was at home in September, and from the October, I haven't stopped working since, which has been fantastic. So I've had schools, and thank you. So that's been really great. So, you know, if it's a mixture of, if it's consultancies, I've been in some schools for long-term consultancy. So I've had one client that I've started from that point to now with.
Wow.
And there's some clients that are just short, quick audits. Others, it's just a training session. Lots of word of mouth. And as I've developed my products around schools, so like I've got an online training platform, it's starting to promote that and develop how that looks for the schools as well. So I really feel at the moment like I'm kind of, I've worked around my school niche, and I've got what I really want out of that at the moment, and starting to develop that a bit further. I don't need to develop that so much more, but I have to push what I've already developed. But the other side of it is definitely, as I've talked about before, pushing into the family work. So the family work for me as well was a lot of word of mouth. So you can imagine in this sphere anyway, people want people they can truly trust, somebody that they're going to, you know, they're trusting their little person with you. And so what I've found is that parents I'd either worked with before through a school or in other ways have then realised what I'm doing, because I popped myself on Facebook as quick as I could and all of those kind of things. And they were starting to refer their friends, or I had referral from people that have known me for a while. And so that's how the family work has kind of developed. And so really the last 2 years, I've ridden on the word of mouth, which has been absolutely fantastic. But there's another part of your business, isn't it, that has to jump into another space. And that's where I am now, really. So, yeah.
Amazing. That's such an amazing kind of start to kind of, I suppose you're in the middle now, but you don't often hear people say I started and I've been working since, particularly with one client consistently as well. And just on word of mouth alone. That's fantastic. So well done.
Yeah, thank you.
And you must be doing a good job, clearly.
They're holding on to me. I've been offered a few jobs since, which has been great, but I'm like,
okay, I'm good, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you was in the education space, reliable, dependable, consistent, all things that I would associate with kind of the education space for the most part. You will always have a job. When you then decided to take that leap of faith and start out on your own, what were the views of the people around you? Because I can imagine somebody must have said, what are you doing? Like, this is the kind of most reliable industry. Why would you ever try and go out on your own?
Most definitely. How do I put this? So colleagues and leaders I worked with found it very difficult when I made the decision. Some direct colleagues that, you know, were friends didn't, because they knew where it was coming from. But those who kind of thought it came out of the blue found it a strange decision and found it difficult for themselves, because I think the role I was in as well, I was impacting a few layers of things. And so that was quite an interesting transition. And so it was something that still kind of made me realise it was still right, even though that was a very interesting transition. I think everybody's point for me was, you know, running schools and head teacher here, there and everywhere. And it was really funny. So my first year of teaching, I remember turning around to my dad and saying, I'm not sure teaching's going to keep me forever. Because actually teaching wasn't the destination for me. When I started teaching, it was because I wanted to be an educational psychologist. I didn't become an educational psychologist because once I got to understand what it was about, it didn't really fit me. You know, it wasn't enough face-to-face work for me. It wasn't enough with the children at the time. It's moved on a lot now. And so it just kind of was, I'm face to face, I'm doing the great stuff that I like, so I'm staying, and that's where it happened. But something very early on said to me that this isn't going to keep you forever. Where it was going to go, I had no clue, but I just knew it wasn't going to keep me forever. And so, as I said, sometimes life just kind of just says to you, this is the time, it's now or never, isn't it, sometimes? And I really felt that. I felt like, actually, if I don't do it now, I'm not sure when I'll do it. And as I said, all the other factors that I had behind in my mind around being present for my son, and, you know, really focusing it on, because he's got some needs as well. So I was in a point where I'm like, okay, I'm at work giving all this out and my son's not getting this, and I'm having to try and tell other people how to support him, and I'm like, nah, you know, that doesn't make sense. So everything for me just lined up correctly. There was a change in leadership where I was, and so there was a change in perception of my role and me, and those kind of things can make an interesting dynamic.
Give it the push you needed, right?
It's just a little bit. So that was the final push, you know. But as I said, like the seed was really was sown on maternity, and I believe I went back to work around the March. So he was 10 months old when I went back, and in the September of that year, I met somebody who really spoke into my skills and my life, and he kind of said to me, this is what the difference could be, and this is what you could be doing, not knowing that I had that question. And not knowing that I'd actually questioned myself. And that again was one of those meetings that wouldn't naturally have happened. It was a meeting that definitely was an alignment or something, whatever you believe in, you know, but for me, it was definitely an alignment. And I just felt like all of these things were just starting to align and be really clear that it's now. And I thought, okay, it's now. So it didn't really matter what people thought. But to be honest, even though at my grand age, who I was worried about telling was my parents, like, you know, you got this career, you've got all of this going on. But they surprised me, because they just looked and was like, you know what you're doing? If you know what you're doing, carry on. And it was okay, alignment. This is
from they said that we're good. Me and Dad is in agreement. Life is good. We can do this now. I love that.
Yeah.
So taking it back then to kind of your childhood and growing up, and even suppose your early education, was there anything that happened to you specifically, or any experiences that you had that made you want to kind of be this person that supports children, whether that be through being an educational psychologist or doing what you do now? Like, are there any key things that you can pinpoint?
I'm the last of 5. So I'm that auntie who was an auntie before they could speak. So the house was constantly full. One of my nieces is 3 months older than myself. Wow. So our house was constantly full of children. I grew up in that space, but also with the role of auntie in that space. So I don't know if that was just where it all came from, kind of caring and being there so early on. And so that was probably where it came from. And even though we had, my mum and dad's I've got 13 nieces and nephews, and my mum and dad's got 13 grandchildren, there was also other children that were constantly in our house. And so it was just the space that I was in. So children was just a natural thing for me, you know, to be around and want to be around. When I first finished university, I had that thing. So I did psychology and I did social policy and sociology, and I did all these ologies. And so as I came out of university, I was kind of like, okay, which way do I really want to go? There was still this heart for children, but it was just kind of like, okay, let me see. So I went into kind of a social policy type job, and within a couple of months I was just like, nah, this isn't holding me. So even though I'm a systems girl and I love that kind of part of it, it wasn't holding me. There was no real motivation there. And then so after those couple of months, I ended up just picking up some agency work and ending up in a special school, and the journey started there. And that's when I just knew it was just going to be what it was going to be. the teacher part didn't actually come until about probably 3 or 4 years into that. When I started, so back about then, I won't say how far back, but very far back then, mentors weren't really a thing. They started to become the new thing. So now we know that, every child with a mentor or something. So back then, mentors wasn't a thing. So the area that I was in, they started this new mentor program for young people. So I was one of the first mentors in the area. So I was given the space to develop that role for the area, which was fantastic for me. And for me, that was just really starting to build those blocks of what would my future look like. And so working with what the word would be disaffected young people was kind of what ended up being just, again, that passion from the psychology and pushing it forward. So it was that role that made me go, okay, the educational psychology is where I'm heading. Then I went into the teaching, etc., and then the journey continued. But it's been really interesting on my job journey and my career journey, that a lot of the roles that I've had have been first roles, like the role of something that's just new. I don't know if that's just my personality and I'm just like, okay, I can kind of try and be creative there and step into that, or if that was just alignment again. But yeah, so the last role, my last teaching role, which for me was perfect, I headed up an autism resource base, but it was the second one in Birmingham City. I was basically given a room and said, go ahead with it. So it was basically started from scratch, got the staff in, got all the children settled, got the setting autistic friendly. And for me, that's really where I am. I'm a builder. I love to see something that I literally can vision this happening and I can see this clearly in my mind. And so that has been kind of a pattern in some parts of my career anyway. So being in business, I still have that in me, that vision thing and that building side. It's just now though I haven't got like 10 team members that I can go, can you do that bit and that bit and that bit? So I'm like, no, trying to do all this vision like this and think way too big for you, Em.
Well, that actually leads on to a good question. Obviously you're used to doing what you're doing, but in kind of an employed environment, and you would have had a team. How have you been able to transition? And what are some of the difficulties, or how have you managed to change?
That has been a challenge. My mind works quickly, so I can become a little bit magpie-ish. I'm working on it, but I can work quite quickly. So what I found beforehand is that when I was in a position where I had a team and I could say to them, actually, I'm thinking of A, B, and C. Let's try and see, this little team can do that and that little team can do that. I found myself finding myself in a place of a bit of frustration because I feel it's not moving quick enough, because I've had this idea of why is it not moved, and, forgetting that it's just me and, and having to think a little bit better. So I've become much better with myself. So when I think about the 2 client groups that I've got, they are large client groups. And when I started trying to do it all and, messaging to all, and marketing is really not my strength at all. So I was trying to do all of these messaging to all and just realizing I was getting myself in a bit of a state. And so it was really just saying, you need to pick a lane with some of your messaging. You need to pick a lane with what you're looking at, and, and really think about it. So I've had to grow as well through that process, to let my brain slow down a little bit, have my ideas book, throw it in there and close it so I don't look at it straight away. And so you can come back to that eventually. But actually, it's been something that I've had to truly learn through these 2 years. That's been a challenge, definitely.
I love that you have an ideas book. I think more people need them, because a lot of people slow themselves down in business because they just want to do everything all at once. And actually, as you rightly pointed out, you kind of do need to pick a lane or a couple of lanes,
yes,
but not too many. Not too many lanes, and just perfect that before moving on. Whereas a lot of the time people want to do 10, 12, 15 things at once and wondering why nothing is moving forward. And nothing is moving forward because you're not giving anything enough time to move forward, because you jump into the next thing. So I love that you had the self-awareness to work that out. Like, let's put it in the book. And also, you can come back to things. So there's ideas that I've had for things for years, and I'm only just starting the process of developing them now, or releasing or launching or whatever you call it. But it's going to happen. You just, like, we've got, hopefully, fingers crossed, we've got a life to lead. There'll be time for things. So in terms of, you mentioned the importance of mentors, and you also mentioned that somebody came and kind of spoke life into you that kind of pushed you in this direction. Has there been anyone else along the journey that's been kind of really influential in holding you up or motivating you, not just necessarily in business, but just in life generally? Who are they, and how important have they been to you?
Definitely. I think, in so many different ways. I'm really fortunate. I've got close-knit relationships. I like relationships that are really close, and people that can say to me when I'm in my little space, "Oh, everything's fine," and they can look at me like, "Yeah, really," they can do that to me. And I love the fact that I have people like that very close to me. My husband's been a rock in terms of how he supports with our son. So, he's put him to bed tonight and things like that. And so I have that rock, and that's really, really important, because when, as you know, business doesn't always run on a certain time. It's not like I go out in the morning, come back at a certain point. It works in its own timing. So that flexibility in our home has been really key. And really helpful. I've got some really key close friends who are just champions, just real supportive. When I'm saying, have I done the right thing, like stepping out of all of that and coming into this, and they're like, yes, Emma, you really have, because the version of you now is so much better and so much so much more you than it was. And so it's those things as well that I hold on to, but they bring back to me. My parents, so supportive. Sometimes you think your parents don't understand what you're doing, and I still don't think they fully understand what I'm doing. But just the way that they support in terms of the conversations. My mum would just start some random question, I'm like, "Yeah, Mum," and if she sees me on Facebook, I'll get something from my dad or something. So those kind of things. So and just having people who really know me very, very well, and being able to really touch base with me when I'm having those unsure moments, I think has just been truly, truly key. I think in terms of like the business world, so the gentleman that I met at the very beginning, he still remains, him and his whole family and his wife is just so great. So they're still around, and they're still a very much a background influence in it all as well. And my son, it just remains my motivation. Like, when I think about why I'm doing what I do and I look at him, I think that's just why I'm doing what I'm doing. So let's keep going. So many people around me motivate and support, definitely.
It sounds like you've got a really good support system, actually.
Definitely. I think sometimes practically, because everybody's life is so demanding, isn't it? So I would say sometimes practically we don't have that support. My parents don't live here, they live abroad. But emotionally, definitely, emotionally we have a great level of support, and people we can truly turn to. Yeah.
It's beautiful. You mentioned a moment ago about the fact that you kind of be like, everything's fine, and people will say, actually, no, it's not. Every time I've met you and spoken to you, you always have a very kind of happy spirit. I think sometimes I'm kind of just like, oh
really?
And not even that just for me. Like, I'm not a particularly happy person. I'm just kind of I've got flat energy, I would say, a lot of the time. But you're always happy and bubbly. Have you found kind of within business, sometimes you will keep that smiley face on even when I love that example of the swan that's kind of serenely above water but underneath going like this. Do you find that has ever been you, and have you ever even found that sometimes I just can't keep grinning today?
Definitely there's days, I've had a life journey. And I think for me, because I've had a life journey, I know where to find my source of okay. So I know where to be okay in it all. And so even when things aren't feeling 100%, I can find my okay. I have a faith as well. So that more than okay, that's that in that space. And so I find that if I'm down, I'm not down for long. I find that if I have had a knock now, not before, this has not always been me, but I find at the moment, if I have a knock of some sort, I can kind of recenter and I can kind of find my center, because I've had my own life story that's been interesting, shall we say. And so so for me, I find I have found my space of okay. Now there have been times, you know, don't for a minute think I'm just smiling and grinning all the time at everybody, but there have been times in this recent period that have been really tough. You know, I've not been well, we've lost people, you know, trying to do the business element in the middle, trying to parent in the middle of that, it has been tough, you know. But what I've learned is that be kind to yourself. It's fine. It's tough. It will move. It will change. But right now, stop. Stop and experience it, feel it, do whatever you have to do to get back into your okay space. So I've learned to not push myself past situations that are hard. I've learned to be able to really find me in that moment and then move myself out of it. Because I think that my past me, when big hard situations have happened, had the tendency to try and push myself out of it so that the healing didn't happen, and then the healing tried to catch up with me later. And so I've learned that actually sit in it, understand what it is, and learn, and then move yourself out of it. And I think that's just where I am at this stage of my life, is understanding that I might be knocked, but I can find my center.
How did you learn that? And I ask because I'm sure that there may be people watching, listening, who might be thinking, well, okay, so you weren't able to do it before, you now are able to do it. Like what happened in between that kind of forced you to address that? Because I think that's a really good self-reflective way of being, that actually I can't force myself through this because it's going to come back. So I need to sit in it, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's painful. And people don't really want to sit in pain, really, which is why we try to push our way through it. What taught you how to sit in it?
I've had a story. So I often say that if I wrote the book, people would be like, oh, really? That's her. So I've had that story. Wait till she says. And so there's been some great losses in my life. Losses based on trauma. And for me, those moments taught me so much, because they came at pivotal times in my life. Because they happened when I was forming who I was becoming as a young lady into a woman. I think it helped me to know the best side of who I can be, and the side of me I don't really want to go back to. And I think that for me that will always be a benchmark in my life, that experience. And it will always be a benchmark that allows me to know how far I'm willing to go into a space that I don't want to be in. So I'm very conscious of myself to know that, my body has the body memory of that experience, and it doesn't want to go back there. So it captures itself and it captures me so that I can address me. And I think that only reason that happened is because some situations are so large in your life, that it's not a situation you can switch off from if you wanted to. And so you have to walk the walk of it. And I had to walk the walk of it. And so, so for now, situations that come around now are not easier, because that's not the word I want to use, but I don't know what the word is, but actually, because I've found that center and I know how far down I do not want to go, I understand when to reflect and stop and go, where are you? No,
I can relate very much to what you're saying. I think for me, I have really struggled throughout my life of finding that center. That's why part of why I asked the question. And also had some very great losses in very close succession in very traumatic kind of circumstances, and found myself feeling like, put this in a box over here. So I've never necessarily been a, oh my gosh, I'm on the floor, I can't get up for months kind of person. I'm this is awful. Put it in a box, move on. Put it in a box, move on, and just keep doing that. And actually realizing that's not a productive way of moving or living.
Because it catches up, doesn't it?
And it catches up when you're not expecting it. And I think that's the key thing, because there's been times where I've been in really random situations and just floods of tears. This is not okay. It's not about what's happening here. It's about this stuff over here that I never dealt with.
Definitely. And that's what I've learned, is that it doesn't matter where I pack it. If I don't unpack it, I'm carrying it. And so it's understanding that. So, you know, as I explained all the things that have happened to us through lockdown, I knew I had to unpack that. So I'm not saying that I'm fully there yet, but what I know I haven't done is buried any of it. That actually what I've done, I've just faced it. And I've had, you know, days where it's just been, okay, this doesn't feel great and I feel awful and this isn't okay, and I've had to sit still and, you know, and pray for me and really focus in on that strength and foundation for me. So but now I know that I have to do that. It makes coming back from things a little bit easier, and it makes me finding my okay space a little bit easier. So yeah.
Well, you kind of answered my next question in this question, because I was going to ask, how have you been managing in COVID? But you kind of, I'm not going to ask it again because you've already kind of explained that. So what I'm now going to ask you to do is give me your 3 pieces of advice for somebody that is maybe sitting at home and considering taking that leap of faith and starting their own business. What advice would you give to her?
I'll say, first thing, allow yourself to dream really big. I think sometimes we don't give ourselves that space to just like, what is the possibility? You know, I have a what is a possibility vision paper somewhere that I've rolled up somewhere, but it was the vision, that was the possibility. And just allow yourself to really dream big, because that transition means you're moving into something else, and you've got to give yourself that scope to really challenge yourself. So that would be it. Then after that, be a bit realistic. That was the bit that I missed out.
I love that.
So go wide and then go narrow. That's what I was missing at the beginning. I went wide and stayed there. But actually I would go wide and then go narrow and say, okay, so what are my next really logical steps to get in there? And 3, find yourself in it. Because what I found is that the Emma that's come out of teaching that 2 years ago is very different today. Not the core of me, not the values of me, just how I feel and and how present I feel. And so it's enjoy the journey to you as well. So those would be my 3 things. Dream big, then be a little bit more realistic, and then, you know, enjoy you and finding you on that journey. That's what I'd say.
Love that. And also, as a final question, She's the Boss recommends. At the end of every interview, I'm going to be asking for 1 book recommendation. Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a business book, but a book that has impacted you in your life that you think the women watching or the men watching should read.
That's a big one.
Have a moment to deliver.
I like I cannot remember the title of it, but it is an Iyanla Vanzant book. And I remember my godmother buying me this at the age of 17, and I cannot remember the title of it, but I do remember its impact. I'll have to find that title for you, but yeah, basically I loved it. It was just the impact of it, and it was about living in your imperfections, and it was about recognizing that you will have them and it's completely fine, but trying to correct them and perfect them is actually going to just sap your energy and you'll never get there. So actually just enjoy yourself in your own imperfections. So I should have actually remembered the title, I just remembered the message.
No, the funny thing is, one of my favorite books, I always tell the title the wrong way around. I never get it, so I understand. If people want to find out more about you, what platforms can they find you on?
I'm on most platforms really. So I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn. So on Instagram, it's essentially _M1 or the Essential Education Group. And on Facebook, it's my name, Emma Pinnock, or the Essential Education Group. And on LinkedIn, it's Emma Pinnock. So yeah, find me on all the platforms really.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for joining me. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and thank you for being so open and honest in sharing your story. And wishing you every success with the business moving forward.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
And for those of you who've been watching, who've been listening, please, as usual, make sure that you like, make sure that you share, make sure that you leave a comment to let us know what you thought about what Emma shared today and if anything resonated. And if you are interested in being interviewed for She's the Boss, please email me, Daniela at she'sthebossintl.com. Make sure that you're subscribed and following, and make sure you tune in next week, Sunday at 8 p.m. for another She's the Boss female entrepreneur story. Thanks for watching.
Bye.